take over immediately? I guess so. Okay. Actually, my presentation is not so much is merely informational. It's a continuation of last week's, which is basic definitions, so that out of which we build the paradigm. We're not going to be discussing these today, except as to make certain that we know what they mean. Their implications and other aspects will be covered during the course of the course. Sorry about that. I didn't rehearse very well this week. Okay, so let me get my screen up here and start the show. Let's see. I think I got this. Okay, yeah. Okay, welcome to Class 2, More Foundational Definitions of the Just Third Way. And of course, there's our motto: pursuing justice, power, and property for every person. And what we're looking at is in the whole course of this. I gotta stop saying the course of this course is the moral basis of the Just Third Way, which is based on the dignity and empowerment of each person. And all we're doing today is having a quick review, because just for the more definitions. Now, the first one, of course, is, since we're focusing on the dignity and empowerment of the human person, is what is a person? Very briefly, legally, a person is that which has rights. And you have natural persons like human beings, and you can have artificial persons that don't have rights unless a natural person delegates them to them. For instance, a business corporation is a legal person, but it's an artificial created person. It's what they call a legal fiction. So if you use the legal definition, you have it there on the screen there: a human being who is a full and equal member of society with all the rights to which he or she is entitled as a full member, and all the duties and responsibilities that are imposed by those rights. The concept of right is essential to understand that of person, because the universe is divided into persons and things. Persons have rights. Things are the object of rights. Okay. Now, persons, because they have rights, also should have power, because power means the ability for doing. If you don't have power, you can't exercise your rights, obviously. So that's why power, if the easiest way is means the ability for doing. So you have this more expanded definition here: the capacity or ability to do something, act in a certain way, or direct or influence others and affect change. And this also relates to rights, as I said, because a right is the power to do or not do something, some act or acts in relation to others. And persons have rights, therefore persons need power. Now, the primary right with which we're concerned in this course, right next to life and liberty, of course, is private property. Now, we understand private property itself is often hard to understand because it is used even in law in a very loose way sometimes, usually to mean the thing that is owned. Strictly speaking, however, property is not the thing owned. Property is actually two things. One, it's the absolute natural right every single natural person or human being has to be an owner. And this is inherent in what it means to be a human, to be a person. If you do not have the natural right to be an owner, then that means you're not a person. And of course, if that means also, the converse is true, if you are a person, then you have the natural absolute right to be an owner. Now, property is also something else. It's not only the natural absolute right to be an owner that every single human being has, it is the bundle of rights that define how an owner may use what is owned. And this includes quite a bit of things. This is limited and socially determined. It is not absolute, except in the sense that you may never define the exercise of property in such a way that an owner is not an effective owner. In other words, you can own this, but you can't use it. Well, then what you did was strip somebody of property. So the rights of property and the right to property are two halves of the same coin, but they are distinct, and you must keep them separate, at least intellectually, because the right to be an owner is absolute. The rights of property are necessarily limited. And the way that they're usually limited is that it defines on what you may own and how you may use it. In general, the rights of property mean the right to control what is owned and the right to enjoy the fruits, the income or whatever of what you own produces. That's called, in Latin, it's called the usufruct, from which we get usury for illicit taking of property, but that's another issue in another class. Now, the limitation over the rights of property are, again, in general, you can't use what you own to harm yourself, other people, or the common good as a whole. In other words, the first rule of natural law is good is to be done, evil is to be avoided. And we see this in how we understand the rights of property, is that you can't legitimately use what you own to hurt anybody, including yourself. Now, that brings us to how on earth do we get property? Well, you can inherit it if you pick the right parents. If you come into something that's abandoned, you can just pick it up and take possession. The first two, are generally not too good today because you can't count on them. So in general, the way to become an owner is to have access to money and credit. And that brings us into what is money and credit. Or as, what was his name again? Henry Dunning MacLeod pointed out over 100 years ago, money and credit are the same thing. They're just two halves of the same coin, so to speak. Money is simply the most specific form of credit, or actually the most general, in a sense, it's the most general form of credit, but it's, well, anyway, we don't need to get into that. All we need to know about money is what Lewis Kelso said. Money is a yardstick for measuring economic input. And it's also the medium of exchange. We say the medium of exchange because there are two schools of monetary thought. There's the banking principle, which binary economics is a part of, and that is that the quantity of money, or money itself, comes from things that have value. Money is the way I exchange what I produce for what you produce. The other school is called the banking school, or the banking principle, and that the banking principle is basically the quantity, the level of economic activity determines the quantity of money. Money is created by economic activity. And opposed to this is the currency principle that seems to have the world by its throat today. Kelso called it the slavery of past savings, which is that economic activity comes from money. Well, this, according to Kelso, was completely backwards. And also according to Adam Smith and Jean-Baptiste Say and quite a few other people. But it's the paradigm that we're struggling against today. And if you try to answer an economics or a finance exam with what you're hearing here today, you'll flunk, because everybody else assumes the slavery of past savings as a given. Binary economics and the entire Kelso paradigm does not. In other words, money is derived from production. Production does not derive from money. Now, here we have, on this slide, we have money is the medium of exchange, how we, exchange what I produce for what you produce. Credit is a loan of money to be repaid. Money and credit are both based on promises and trust, obviously. And money and credit are not supposed to be a commodity, even though all the schools, mainstream schools of economics today, the Keynesian, the monetarist, and the Austrian, treat it as if it was is a commodity. It's not. In a sense, currency and, pieces of money can be a commodity, but that's not their main purpose. Their main purpose is to transfer, to measure and facilitate things of value and the exchange of things of value, not themselves to be regarded as things of value, because they have no value unless they stand for something. Now, how do we measure the value of our money? Well, at this point, we can't get into a big discussion on it because we don't have the time, for one thing, and we're just going over terms on this. In general, it's a good idea to have some kind of standard, but what that standard is, we're not prepared to discuss today. The possibility of using the price of the kilowatt hour has been discussed. This is what Buckminster Fuller went into, but we'll have to save that for another day. The value of having a standard is that we know what something is worth from day to day. Keynesian economics, for example, is built on the assumption that you can manipulate the value of the currency and the money supply in order to achieve political results, so that from one day to the next, you have no idea what the heck is going on. It keeps everybody off balance and keeps the government in power, because the government has been given complete control over money in the Keynesian system. Now, there are three basic types of money. Two of these Kelso recognized. The third is sort of mine and Dawn's invention to try to explain all the illegitimate money that's floating around. You have past savings money. Past savings money results from consuming less than you produce, and you can accumulate this as savings. This is how Keynes defines savings, and it's rather bizarre in the general theory of employment, interest, and money, his quasi-magnum opus. He says he knows of no one who defines savings except by cutting consumption to less than production, and then spends the next 20 pages condemning people who define it another way. First, he says that nobody thinks that way, and then he goes attacking the people who do think that way. Then there's future savings money. Future savings money is the present value of future increases in production. Keynes did not recognize this at all. I don't think that the monetarists recognize it either, simply by the way they act. And viewing money as a commodity kind of kicks out future savings money from your paradigm, so that the currency principle people, the slavery of past savings, cuts out half the picture right away. But however, they do include no savings money. In other words, money that is created out of nothing, or basically what government debt. Well, government debt is simply the present value of what the government expects to be able to collect in taxes in the future. And that means that if they can't collect the taxes, or if the people decide not to vote them the taxes, then they're out of luck and the currency becomes worthless. Or the government simply has no ability to collect taxes, which happened in Germany and Austria-Hungary after World War I. And you had the strange phenomenon of hyperinflation, where you had a price level rising faster than the money supply could be increased, which is completely surreal. Now, the proper use of past savings, which results from past cuts in consumption, is consumption. In other words, you have production out there which has not been consumed. So you use the savings that represent that production to purchase that production and consume it. The proper use of future savings money is investment in new capital or new projects that will generate the money that will repay the credit that brought the future savings money into being, and then thereafter generate a living income for whoever owns the new capital. The proper use of no savings money is not to be used at all. Okay, now we get into another interesting area. What is justice? Since this is Justice University, this is rather critical. Justice is the classical virtue that says everyone gets what he is due. In other words, if justice is operating, then you get exactly what you are due. And the big question then is, how do we determine what is due? And in fact, what is a virtue? We call justice a virtue, but what is a virtue? Virtue is the habit of doing good. Virtue, by the way, means humanness. So that when you become virtuous, you are becoming more fully human. See, every human being is as fully human as every other human being, but by acquiring and developing virtue, you become more fully human. You become a better human being. Now, respect for human dignity and justice demands that everybody have the exercise of rights, which we talked about. The primary one that we're concerned with in this course is, of course, private property and how to get it. And so that within the limits prescribed by the society, and which of course are the exercise of rights should never be defined in such a way as to destroy the underlying natural right, so that every single person in that society should be able to have access to the means to exercise rights and of course to exercise justice and to acquire and possess private property. Now, justice is divided into many parts. Individual justice is how we render to other persons and to ourselves what they and we are due. Then there's an individual justice in the classical system is commutative justice. Commutative justice is the justice of equality. In other words, if I owe you $5, I have to pay you $5. If I owe you 2 loaves of bread, I have to give you 2 loaves of bread. But then there's distributive justice. Distributive justice, Aristotle described as the justice of proportion. And it's a social justice in the sense that all justice is social because it requires other persons to work. Distributive justice, because it's proportional, means that if you're, say, in a group endeavor with a number of people and you contribute 10% to that project, then you are due 10% of the profits or you suffer 10% of the losses. So it's not like I put in $100 to this $1,000 project, therefore I am due $100 back. Well, no, if the project makes $1 million, you're due $100,000 back. If the project loses 100,000, then you owe loses $1 million, then because you have 10% of that, you owe 100,000. And this, by the way, illustrates the importance of having limited liability for a corporation, because a limited liability for a corporation allows you to join with other people, contribute, say, 10% to it. You put your $100 into this corporation, but it loses $1 million. Limited liability means that all you lose is that $100 because they go after the corporation and what the corporation owns, but they can't come after you, that's actually a fairly recent innovation in corporate law, because prior to the mid-19th century, one of the reasons why you didn't have expanded capital ownership was because if you put money into a corporation, you were jointly and severally liable for all debts of that corporation, which meant that if you were some poor schmo who put his 100 pounds into the corporation and the corporation lost £1 billion and they came after you for £1 million, they could throw you in prison. Now, you have individual justice, which relates to how we relate to other human beings. But then we also have social justice, which is the justice directed at the common good and how we relate to our institutions, not just other human beings, but other human beings organized and participating in social institutions. Now, social justice is the justice directed to the common good, which of course raises the issue of what is the common good. The common good is on an individual level, it's the capacity every single human being has to become more fully human. And this is what they, if you want philosophical language, it's analogously complete, meaning the same in every single human being, so that every single human being is as human as every other human being. Now, socially, the common good manifests as that vast network of institutions which are there to help us become virtuous. Institutions are not themselves virtuous. They are what we call structures of virtue or structures of vice that assist us to becoming virtuous, so that if they are badly structured and actually don't help us become virtuous, then social justice means that we organize and we fix the institution so that the institution again helps us become virtuous. So that social justice is concerned with the right ordering of our social institutions so that they can do their job, which is to allow each person who interacts with that institution to become more fully human or virtuous. Virtue, by the way, means humanness. I think I said that already, though. Okay, and I said the common good socially is that vast network of interconnected institutions within which we become virtuous and which assist us in becoming more fully human. Now, this is getting a lot more complicated probably than we really need to for social justice. Social justice used to be considered something general and vague. And what Father William Ferree, who was one of CESJ's co-founders, pointed out was that Pope Pius XI redefined social justice from something vague and general, usually meaning redistribution, into something very specific with a directed object, the common good, and a defined act, the act of social justice, which consists of organizing to correct our institutions. So that, to sum up, individual justice looks to individual good, directly to individual good, but indirectly to the common good, which is the old definition of social justice or legal justice, where social justice, the new definition by Pope Pius XI, looks directly to the common good and only indirectly to individual good. Whenever you hear someone say that social justice means redistribution or paying a just wage or something, no, that's all individual. Social justice means making it possible to pay a just wage or making it possible to redistribute necessary goods and services. It is not itself doing that. We just covered that. Now, economic justice. At the individual level, economic justice means, behaving yourself in the market. If you're selling something, you sell at a just price. If you're hiring somebody, you pay them a just wage. When you pay somebody in a fair exchange, you give them the price that you agree upon and you don't cheat them. I mean, basically being just at an individual level. At a social level, it's something different. Socially, economic justice is the application of social justice to our economic systems that make it possible to behave individually economically just, if I'm not piling too many words on top of another here. So that, as I implied, economic justice means that the moral principles are able, at the social level, economic justice enables us individually to practice the moral principles which guide us in carrying out just economic institutions. But socially, they help us design our economic institutions so that our economic institutions allow us to act just at an individual level. So that means that for example, the principles that should guide us in designing our institutions to be economically just is that everyone has the equal opportunity to participate, both as an owner of labor and an owner of capital, and also to receive distributions commensurate with our contribution. Now, that is a little messed up today simply because you have if everyone was an owner of capital and could derive a just income and a sufficient income from ownership of capital, you could have a genuinely free market in labor, but you don't. The way things are today, you pretty much are forced to pay people what they need rather than what they're worth. We don't really know what people are worth because the free market does not operate with respect to labor. Now, and that brings us to our conclusion, which is the three principles of the Kelso-Adler theory of economic justice. Now, it's important to note that we treat these differently from Kelso and Adler. Kelso and Adler treated them strictly as principles. We treat them as specific virtues. Now, for most people, that's not going to make too much difference, but it makes a huge difference when you're trying to be scientific and precise in all of this. Because Kelso and Adler spoke just about the principle of participation, the principle of distribution, and something that we have improved upon and expanded, the principle of limitation. Well, now we speak of participative justice and distributive justice, which we've covered. Participative justice means that is the input principle that, that means that every single person has the right to participate both with capital and with labor. And the distributive principle is to receive a distribution of the results of that contribution in proportion to the relative value of the contribution. But then we've expanded the principle of limitation to social justice. So that fits in with participative justice, distributive justice, and social justice, the feedback and corrective principle, which means that if the institutions of society, in this case, the economic institutions of society, are not structured in such a way as to permit everyone to participate or everyone to receive a just distribution, then we get organized and we fix the institution so that they can participate and receive just distributions. Social justice in the economic realm does not mean forcing everybody to participate. It means fixing it so that they can participate. And just with respect to distributive justice, social justice in the realm of economic justice does not mean paying a just wage or paying the owners what they are due. It means making it possible to pay the owners what they are due and what the wage earners earn. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. And by now you have all the terms that you need to be completely confused in all the upcoming courses if you do the readings. Now let me get this off here and we can, let's see. Okay, there.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. I think understanding the terminology, it's going to take a while before these words really interconnect. Their meanings will be more clear as you see the relationship. And we're going to really, I think we want to emphasize giving you time, each of the participants time to ask questions. And I think Norm